I'm coming to you today from the great state of Michigan, where it's nice and cool up here. And I want to share something with you that the Lord just laid upon my heart about faith. A crisis of faith. You know, every single one of us have faith, because given to us is a measure of faith. But every single one of us also are going to have that faith tested. And so what do we do in that crisis of faith? Now I think about Lot's wife. God said, leave, go, and don't turn back. And as they were leaving, here comes the crisis of faith. I wonder. And she turned. And of course she turned in that pillar of salt. She failed in the crisis of faith. And I wonder sometimes how many of us fail in that crisis of faith. I mean, we're not alone. Every single one of us, we do have that crisis come, because our faith needs to be tested so that it'll grow. I want the kind of faith that Abraham had when God said, leave, and he left. Sacrifice your son, Isaac, and he was going to do that very thing. No hesitation. If God said do it, he did it. How many of us can say the same thing? We have a crisis of faith. You think about Solomon. Solomon, the wisest and the richest man who ever lived. And God said, don't marry any of those foreign women. They'll turn you. What did he do? In the crisis of faith, he married and he turned. Samson, one of the mightiest men who ever lived, used of God, but he had a crisis of faith. And in that crisis, he gave away the secret to his power. And he turned. So this is what happens to us when we doubt what God says, or we pray and what we ask for doesn't happen. God, I ask you for this, and Lord, you didn't come through for me. And we have a crisis of faith. Are we going to continue to trust God, believe God, and follow God, and live for Him? Or are we going to get angry and turn? So many people turn, angry with God. But the good news is, if you are angry with God, or if you have turned on God, all you got to do is keep turning and come back. I mean, that's what Peter did. Peter, in a crisis of faith, denied the Lord. I don't know him, he said, and he said it 3 times. And he was even warned by Jesus that it was going to happen, and he said, never. But it did. And in a crisis of faith, he turned. He was willing to say, hey, you know something, I'm going back fishing, and lead others in that same direction. But then God gave him an opportunity to turn back, a second chance. And Peter took him up on it. And Peter was restored. And Peter was greatly used as a result of being restored. The crisis of faith. You see, it was that same Peter who said, be sober, be vigilant, because your adversary, the devil, seeks to devour you. Put you in a crisis of faith to turn from God. But don't listen to him. Don't flirt with him. When I talk about flirting, you know, some people flirt with sin. They get as close to sin as they possibly can without feeling like they have really indulged or that they can draw back. Or some people, you know, they've had a habit and they say, okay, I'm going to give that habit up. And they do. And then the enemy comes along and says, if you think you're really over it, now here's a crisis of faith. If you really feel like you're over it, try it one more time just to be sure. And many people succumb to that lie. They turn and they fall. They fail. So what about you today? How is your faith? Is it strong in the Lord? And no matter whether there's another prayer ever answered, or whether you never ever feel the presence of God in your life, will you still stick with Him? Will you still serve Him? I like what Joshua said. As for me and my house, we're going to serve the Lord. And I hope today you'll say the same thing. I am going to serve God no matter what. A lot of things are coming down the pike. A lot of things are happening in this world. A lot of things can cause you to fear and wonder about, where's God? He's where He's always been, right there with you to help you at all times. Just keep your eyes upon Jesus. God bless you. I'll be praying for you.